Good day and welcome to Asian Development Bank Healthy Oceans and Tech Finance Forum. My name is Wouter Schalken. I'm the Senior Sustainable Tourism Specialist with the Asian Development Bank, and I will moderate this spotlight session on ocean and coastal tourism, changing the tide on sustainability. Now, we all know that tourism is very much related to ocean and coastal resources. A good 80% of global tourism relies in one way or the other on our ocean and coastal resources for its tourism efforts. That depends, of course, very much, ranging from just providing a beautiful decor to actually actively using it to swim, to dive, to fish, to cruise, etc. But many of the countries that Asian Development Bank supports, especially the small island development states, rely heavily for a good 20% even of their GDP on tourism. So tourism forms a huge part of the blue economy. And that brings a lot of challenges with regards to the resource base, challenges with regards to the utilization of that through tourism. And those challenges is something that we like to discuss today. Are we doing enough to make sure that tourism contributes effectively to the health of our oceans, or should more be done? And we're going to do that with a very distinguished and experienced panel who will hopefully guide us a little bit in making sure that we get a good understanding of what the efforts of the tourism sector are to date, both at operational level as well as governance level. So we have representatives from the private sector as well as from government authorities. And we also want to know what the priorities are for us to address going forward. We want to do that as ADB because this is a sector that is very dear to our heart and it's something we want to support, but also other development partners, of course. We want to provide guidance about what the priority intervention should be going forward. Let me introduce the panel to you. We have 4 representatives, and I'm very pleased to see joining us from the Maldives, Shahina Ali, who's a pioneer when it comes to dive tourism in the Maldives, over 30 years of experience. I don't think there's a sandbank or reef in the Maldives that she hasn't explored. I think she's been very outspoken, passionate in commitments to Maldives' environmental challenges and objectives. She's been part of the National Environment Commission. And I think from about 2015, she's been the executive director of Parley Maldives, who are strong in providing advocacy projects around ocean health, reducing single-use plastics. And in that capacity, I think she's traveled the country extensively, making sure that residents, visitors, and everybody understands the challenges and commitments that they need to make to the oceans. From Kiribati, we're joined by Petero Manufalau, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Tourism Authority of Kiribati, responsible for sustainable development and, of course, the promotion of tourism. The Republic in the Central Pacific is, of course, very exposed to what is happening in the vast Pacific Ocean around them. And he's been leading the work on trying to formulate circular economies initiatives, advocacy around that, working with communities. And he brings all those efforts on the back of extensive experience in the region. He's a well-known tourism personality in the Pacific, having worked for both the private sector as well as governments and regional entities. In Bangkok, Thailand, we're joined by Jeffrey Smith. Jeff is Vice President for Sustainability of Six Senses Hotels and Resorts, a large upmarket hotel chain who are pioneering efforts around sustainability, community involvement. And Jeff does that bringing experience as an engineer in actual sustainability planning at the urban level, at the rural level, having worked extensively in community tourism efforts, in community conservation tourism efforts, even with wildlife resources. I think he's been instrumental in making sure that the individual hotels and resorts of Six Senses are adhering to their sustainability agenda. And we're going to start proceedings off with Ms. Kumali Fernando in Colombo, Sri Lanka. She's the chairperson of everything that is tourism in Sri Lanka. I think both all the four authorities, the promotion, the development authority, the convention bureau, and even, I believe, the hotel school are all under her excellent chairpersonship. And she's doing that on the back of about 30 years working in corporate governance, even involved in many of the initiatives currently at president level in Sri Lanka around fighting the COVID pandemic, but also the sustainability agenda. She's worked in banking for many years, even in my hometown of Frankfurt, I'm told. I'm very pleased to have you here with us today. And Ms. Fernando, we're going to turn our first question to you to provide us some guidance and insights based on your personal as well as your organization's experience in dealing with the topic of ocean health and tourism. We know that there's many excellent strategies formulated in Sri Lanka. They've identified priority tourism areas, products, hubs, gateways, etc., even coastal resorts, priority developments. And we'd like to hear from you a little bit, if you can share your experience, Sri Lanka's tourism experience in sustainable coastal and marine tourism. What are some of the key achievements you feel you've made as a destination, and what are some of the challenges that still remain for a truly sustainable contribution to ocean health? Ms. Fernando, over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity. Yes, tourism depends largely on our beaches. Of course, we have our culture and heritage and food and so on, but a lot depends on our beaches. And at the highest level of government, sustainability, ocean health is critical for us. From the 21.9 million citizens of Sri Lanka, almost 11 million, that is, 50% of our citizens live on the coastal area. About 63% of our industry is based there. So Sri Lanka actually boasts about 103 rivers, about 12,000 small ancient dams. We have about 320 large ancient dams as well, about many, many man-made lakes, and about 10,000 reservoirs. Our coastal line is about 1,300 kilometers. So that's the good news. But with that comes with all the rivers and dams, and everything streams into to the sea. So we have some certain amount of challenges. 75% of our hotels actually are on the beach, with 80% of the rooms also on the beach. So the clean, healthy coastal marine environment is really critical for Sri Lanka. Some areas we've zoomed into is on the waste management, the plastic contamination, the coral reef and restoration of mangroves, which actually we've done quite a lot of work on already. And of course, educating the users of the marine resources and how we will achieve our goals. So from a tourism perspective, immediately during COVID itself, we implemented a green building concept where all tourism investments need to adhere to our sustainability objectives, which in the planning stage itself. So whether it's using renewable energy, recycling, zero plastic, etc. So the new investors are encouraged to use those guidelines. And in a way, our architecture, also our old architecture, everything is leaning towards sustainability. So the new investors are anyway, you don't really need to force them, because a lot of them are going for that on their own initiative. We're developing now, as you speak, a sustainability roadmap, actually. We've reached out to USAID as well as ADB and World Bank. What we're doing is we've kind of done some work already on this, actually. So we are creating our own guideline for sustainability, like some other countries like Slovenia, Portugal, I think Costa Rica, some of these countries have done this. So we create our own guideline and implement it to all of sort of government approach as well. We've implemented and the National Sustainability Destination Certification already started that process. The stakeholders are already getting that. But what we are really looking for is to create our own guideline encompassing also the ocean, and then providing our tourism travel app, which we are launching soon, providing even the carbon footprint, everything on a daily basis to the consumer. So this is all very important. For the first time, we are also working with a lot of other ministries, which I think it didn't happen so well before for some reason. But so we are working with the environmental authority, the UDA, the coast conservation, all that to work together. So they are also spearheading sort of the mangrove, certain areas they are spearheading. Some of the key challenges, of course, is that with COVID, the use of plastic, for example, which is a huge issue for Sri Lanka, really, one of the biggest issues we are having, is that with COVID, people started using more plastic, right? Because they were not using in the hotels, the washing and sanitizing and so on. So now with the amazing vaccination and so on we are having here, actually 98% of everyone who's eligible has the vaccination in the double as well. So they're going in third boost and so on. So we will use this opportunity now to move from plastic out of, and then we are reaching out really to ADB to assist us with all the canals and rivers that bring in the plastic. That we have already put a few mesh to collect the debris. We've already done that. We've spoken to the private sector. So they are collecting and recycling. So what we are really wanting to do is, beach cleaning has been done for 30, 40 years, but frankly, it's of no use. So majority of the pollution comes from within our island. Of course, there's ships and all that, marine debris and all that, but majority of it comes from inland. So our focus is inland, reaching out to funding agencies, international funders to support us to put this. We will spearhead it for you. We will get it done for you. We're also looking for collection, because just telling the citizens don't use plastic, putting the burden on them with all the issues they're having right now, I think we as government need to give an environment for them. So simple things like dustbins. It sounds simple, but it's not done. So dustbins, segregated dustbins, sanitation facilities near the beaches particularly, right? Things like that. We are also, MIPA actually is already done some work in, checking the quality of seawater, which we haven't done successfully. So we are doing that now. Then checking the coastal pollution, doing surveys, what's happening with the coastal habitat, what's the destruction that is happening. Things like that we are looking at quite aggressively. I mean, there's about, I think 2017 is the last the data I have. I think it's like 40 million kilos of plastic went into the sea, probably now this is much more. So we are working with making policy, but I look at it like, how do we get the job done? So the private sector also, who are responsible for this plastic, I think should also be held accountable for this. The bigger, some multinationals, some large local groups should, I feel, at some point be held accountable for this. And also the hoteliers have really taken initiative, I find, on their own. They've gone into zero single-use plastic. They've gone into all the sustainability criteria. They are doing that, and we've promised them, we've given them that promise that if they are compliant, we, the government, will promote them globally as a hotel. So this is something, rather than so much the stick approach, we are taking the carrot approach. Because at this point, I do not think it is good to do the stick approach. And lastly, I would say that we never went for mass-scale tourism, 30, 40 million tourists, like some of our peers. Our highest tourism arrivals was 2.3 in 2018. And our goal is to get to 6 to 7 million. That's it. So we want to keep our island unique. We want to keep it sustainable. We are unable to handle this kind of a pollution. The youth, we feel, is important. And I think that if any funding agency will assist us, please, we want to do a program for all the schools so that they get buy-in to this. And we are also in tourism, which we had failed before, which we have started now doing, is that we never really promoted the marine life so much, because we had so much history and culture and Ayurveda and what have you. We didn't, because we had so many options in the country to selling points. I think we didn't really sell the underwater and all that enough? Now we are doing a program on shipwrecks, for example. So we want to educate not only our potential traveler, but also our citizens and say, look, we have a gold mine there. So now you better be part of saving it. It is in your interest to save it, because I don't think we did that well enough. So I'll leave you at that, and I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Thank you very much. I think it's been very insightful. It's not just about regulations and policy, but it's also the actual actions of residents and visitors that requires a lot of attention. And I'm pleased to hear the cooperation with the private sector, their commitment and the incentives. And I think that's a good link to our second speaker, Jeff from Six Senses. Now, Six Senses operating, I think, about 10 coastally located high-end resorts across Asia. I think the group consists of about 20-odd properties globally. Please, Jeff, can you share with our audience how important sustainability is for the operations, for your guests? Is that one of the key criteria why they select a Six Senses property? But also, is it important for you as an operation? Do you see the bottom line effect of making sure that you are contributing to ocean and environmental health in the locations, the destinations where you operate? Jeff, over to you. I think you're muted.
There we go. Thanks, Wouter, and to my fellow panelists. It's great to be here. Thank you. And just sort of quick clarification, we do have a coastal resort also in Ibiza in Spain. Got to plug that. So yes, sustainability is very important to Six Senses as a brand. We see it as part of our market positioning. We believe that part of the added value we offer to our guests also involves our ability to deliver on sustainability well for our guests. Our goal as a group is to be a leader on sustainability within the luxury hospitality space. So we manage our performance here based on a policy framework that covers everything from the back of house that you don't see behind the scenes in the hotel all the way to the front, which is, of course, guest facing. And that's designed to absolutely minimize any potential negative impacts on communities or the environment. So that will cover things in respect to our marine coastal locations. The relevance would be policies around things like our waste management. We're absolutely committed to reducing plastic as much as possible. That's single-use plastic and really any plastic entering the resort or the hotel that's not necessary. Purchasing guidelines and policies around how we talk to suppliers around not just plastic, but other things in our purchasing and our supply chains. That'll cover our waste management. We require wastewaters treated in a minimum 3-stage treatment process before it's admitted into the marine environment. It also covers in our kitchens. We have seafood no-take lists, and we work with local fishers on trying to implement best policies in our industry. So it's a broad policy framework, and we try to cover everything with that. We manage compliance to that policy framework through a system of audits, and all of our hotels are setting goals to improve their performance within that system and just on sustainability in general. So that's, as a starting point for us, that's sustainability. But what's much more exciting is what we're able to do outside of the hotels. And something we do at all Six Senses is we set aside 0.5% of total hotel revenue, which does add up to quite a bit of money at the end of the year. And that's earmarked to be spent outside of hotel operations on local projects with objectives for community or the environment. So in our marine and coastal locations, a vast amount of that money is directed towards marine conservation. Most often it looks similar to a grant process, a grant issuing process from the hotel. And we're partnering with NGOs, local government agencies, community-based groups, et cetera, on local projects that are making an impact, a positive impact. Definitely we want our guests to be engaged on this. So, for example, where our guests are going out snorkeling, they can meet a marine biologist and learn about the sea life in the seagrass habitat, and they can learn about the program that's in place to protect the seagrass. or if they're going on a dive, they might learn about the work that's being done to restore a coral reef, or maybe it's work that's being done to save a particular species of interest. So we see that as added value through the guest experience. Definitely we see it as something that's fun and we want to engage our guests with. And ultimately, our aim is for our guests to help them understand that they're playing an active role in creating these impacts. And really, without tourism, we wouldn't be able to do this marine conservation work. Back over to you.
Great. Thanks. Great, Jeff. I mean, it's really, I think, interesting to see that the work doesn't stop where the property boundary ends, and that you're really sort of committed to making sure it's an integrated part of the larger destination as such.
Absolutely.
We're going to move as far east as we can to Kiribati, Mari Petero. Great to have you here. We know that you've been instrumental in formulating your country's sustainable tourism development policy framework. I think that is put in place quite recently. You're trying to work at an action plan to operationalize that. So we'd like to hear from you, your shared views about that approach. Now, what is your approach to sustainable coastal and marine resources, marine tourism? And what are some of the key objectives and approaches that you are implementing today? Petero, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, both. And thank you as well to my fellow panelists. It's indeed an honor to be part of this, this panel discussion this afternoon. Before I dive into the intricate details of what we aim to achieve here insofar as sustainable tourism development is concerned, I suppose it's only proper that I first of all introduce Kiribati as a destination. I'm sure a lot of our attendees this evening or this afternoon probably do not know where the Republic of Kiribati is, or you have very little knowledge of us as a nation before we dive into us as a destination. Well, to locate us, you need to look on the map and try and look for where the international date line meets the equator. Once you get your finger on that, that's exactly where Kiribati is. And we're the only country in the world that's actually located across all 4 hemispheres of the globe. In terms of population, we have a small population compared to the destinations that will be featured this evening. We have a total of 119,000 people. The interesting thing about it is half of that population is located on one atoll, on one island, which is Tarawa, and that also happens to be our main urban center. As a nation, our national boundary covers 3.5 million square kilometers. So you can imagine that we are a big nation in that regard. But when you narrow it down in terms of the land size, our total land area only makes up 811 square kilometers across our 33 islands. So in actual fact, we're pretty much a 99% ocean destination, which is why this session this afternoon is quite close to our heart. And that tourism in Kiribati is 100% coastal and marine tourism destination, complemented, of course, by our very unique culture. As a destination, Kiribati is a very young destination. We have not, seen the numbers that our Pacific Island neighbors have, and we're quite grateful for that. In that, with COVID-19, it has allowed us to sit back and really reassess our direction and where we want to take our destination forward or into. As I'd mentioned, we are an experiential destination. So if you'd like to imagine what life in Kiribati is like, or an experience in Kiribati, try to imagine yourself in a Pacific Island destination like Fiji or French Polynesia countries in the 1950s or 60s. So it's a destination where time has literally stood still. And that's one of the unique things about us as a destination. As a coastal and marine destination, Kiribati is, of course, at the forefront of climate change due, of course, to global warming. And this is one of the main challenges we face, and often begs the question is, how do you achieve sustainability on the back of sea level rise, climate change, and under, obviously, food security challenges? And for us, the answer is simple. We are a resilient people, and we need to adapt to the changing times. And of course, as a young destination, trying to make our way, trying to develop our industry, we've come to understand that we've only got one try at this. We've learned from other destinations who probably are trying to reinvent the wheel for them. For us, we're on the other end. We're starting the whole wheel process, and we're fortunate to be sharing experiences with other bigger destinations to allow us to really identify how best we can move the nation forward, or the destination forward, in a very sustainable manner. Now, if I may just introduce the organization that I represent, we're also a very young organization. The Tourism Authority of Kiribati was only established in June 2019 with a very clear mandate to manage Kiribati's tourism and marketing activities and promote the practice of responsible tourism for the Republic of Kiribati. And of course, to guide persons engaged in the tourism industry. We also act an advisory body to government and on matters relating to tourism planning, development, marketing, and of course, regulations and policy. So there's quite a lot on our plate. A few years ago, the government of Kiribati put together the Kiribati 20-year vision. And this is the direction in which government wants to take the country forward. And we're quite blessed that the government of the day has recognized the potential that tourism has in stimulating economic development. A lot of people know Kiribati as a fisheries destination. Tourism has never been at the forefront, so this is our turn to shine. This is an opportunity for us to develop. And like I said, we've only got one chance at this, and developing it in the most sustainable manner is quite critical. So with that, I'm pleased to confirm that when tourism came into the picture, there's already existing policies and legislations in place by various ministries, such as the Ministry of Fisheries, as well as the Environment Conservation Division, who are already doing a wonderful job in advocating for solid waste management practices that are good for the environment. So where tourism comes in is we're pretty much just drawing from those existing legislations and developed what Walter had referred to earlier as the Sustainable Tourism Development Policy Framework, where the tourism stakeholders are rising to the challenge and saying there are existing policies in place. It is our responsibility to understand these policies and weave it into the way that we operate our businesses, because at the end of the day, we are a destination that's surrounded by the ocean. We're an ocean destination, and the blue economy, if it is to ever work, the private sector will need to drive it for us, again, working very closely with government on the existing policies and legislations that they have in place. We have, and examples of these are in some of our other islands, we have marine protected areas. We have areas that are designated for protecting milkfish, for example. There's giant clam protected areas. So there is already work going into it. And when our guests visit, they understand what the country's aim is in terms of conservation, and particularly with coastal and marine resources, and that they understand that they would have to be responsible travelers when they do travel to Kiribati. So that's just a brief introduction from me on our destination, and I look forward to the rest of the discussion this afternoon with other questions that may come my way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Platero, and very interesting to hear that you're actually extending the work that's been done by other sectors, fishery, environment, to make sure that those policies and regulations that are in place already are utilized and strengthened to incorporate tourism as well. We turn our attention to the Maldives. Shaina, you've been very patient. Thank you very much for that. If we think about Maldives, we always think about that unique mixture of resort islands and inhabited islands, but they all share the same resource base. Now, whether it's the tourists on their resorts, whether it's the local populations and the other livelihood activities that occur there, they're all sort of relying on the same water bodies, the same ocean resources for their own livelihood and benefits. Can you share with the audience your views and experience about how to bring those two entities with very sort of vastly different actors together in taking joint responsibility for making sure that Maldives' ocean resources are conserved appropriately? And where do you see that some of the limitations of tourism in terms of its size and presence have been reached? Sheena, over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yes, Maldives is indeed a unique, we started tourism in 75. We are celebrating 50 years of tourism in the Maldives. And we are a very successful destination. We are a high-end, we are the brand that Maldives, the sun ocean seekers are seeking at the moment. Of course, we have 3 different sectors in the industry, main, which is the resorts. We had a one island, one resort policy where everything was managed. And just before we start, the whole industry is actually private sector driven. There's no government, so it's private sector driven. And one island, one resort policy came about, and there was a lot of regulations put onto the development of the resort. So there was a sustainability component. There was a lot of, like how much you can build up footprint should be, how much you should have green. And in that sense, all the resorts, house reefs, I don't know how many kilometers off my head, but all the resort house reefs became, every resort in the Maldives, over 200 resorts almost, is a no-take area, basically, because the resort owns the house reef and 1,000 meters away from the house reef. But then came the liveaboards. It was not regulated. It started, fishing boats converted into liveaboard safaris, accessing these boundaries and dive spots that the resorts were protecting. And actually, when the resorts use it, it's protected. The fishermen also try to, at that point, when we started, was actually very well shared. Liveaboard started without regulating, and in the early 90s, there was a liveaboard regulation that came about as well. So the boats, should have certain standards and all that. But, then came the guest house tourism recently. The last 10 years, we have had actually guest house tourism. I must say that tourism is the driving conversation of sustainability and environment in the Maldives. The minute the guest house tourism opened to the island became suddenly more conscious of their waste management, of their beach cleanliness, of the uninhabited islands close by. Actually they started owning, and then the conflict of resort sharing. For example, an island where the tourists went as an uninhabited island experience suddenly became the guest house experience from the common inhabited island as well. And there have been some issues where these common resources are shared. But I'm a strong believer that actually tourism drives the environment conversation, and tourism drives the minute we go, with our work, we go into implementing the Pale Air strategy, the avoid, intercept, redesign. It fits right into this avoiding bad materials such as plastics, and intercepting. If you must use the materials, intercepting and redesigning, your whole enterprises. So we go, and when we talk about redesigning component to the islands and communities, it's easier for us to convince islands with guest house tourism than islands that doesn't have it. So we believe that tourism is a key player in this. Then the other thing is that we believe that, I personally believe that in Maldives, everything is driven by the tourism sector. If the consumer, most of the imports, 60% of the import is for the tourism sector, whether it is construction, whether it is food, whether it is, use of other stuff, it is for the tourism sector. Consumption is like 5 times higher than a local in each resort, so each visitor. And also resorts are competing now in this boundary of environment. Ecotourism has become a thing. We are the perfect educating school or environment for global climate change impacts. And resorts are now using this as a, I mean, I would love every resort to have an education center for guests about climate change impact. They come, they see what is living. Also, if you look at Maldives, when we started tourism and until recently, as last 15 years, I must say, our tourist arrivals were mainly Europeans. They were very aware of the climate change. They were more respectful towards nature. They understood the oceans more. And then our profile changed to Asian tourism, which actually came from landlocked areas like China, India, and other areas where the ocean was new to them. The usage of ocean, the respect to the ocean, standing on corals, understand the knowledge of the coral reef was almost zero. And this actually started conflicting when you have this European visitor and the Asian visitor, conflict, somebody standing on the reef or removing, shells and eating them on the beach or in the room kettles. This started a huge conversation around that. So I believe the communities and Kiribati, I think, should take this example from all this, where you actually have a back end before you open up for tourism. Maldives had regulated, like I said, when I started, but one of the regulation was the resorts were allowed to dump their green waste or their wet waste, food waste into the ocean. The recent change in policy, we need to change the policies actually to outdated ones to the current status ones. So what I feel is that one of the things that we changed recently is dumping into the ocean, and which is right. But what is happening in the Maldives is, in 50 years, if tourism in the Maldives, we have not actually, with the development of tourism, we have not kept the infrastructure development. Even today, every piece of waste we create, whether it is tourism or whether it is community or local, we actually dispose it by burning it. It ends up in the environment, whether it is burnt or dumped into the sea, it ends up in the environment. Our carbon footprint, this is the biggest carbon footprint Maldives has. And it's quite if you probably measure it, it's quite a lot of carbon footprint. So when we go to the communities and we actually bring these statistics to people, people start believing in us. We are working with 138 community schools, where we are very proud to say that we see at least in 10 islands, we don't see any plastic on the beach. We see them disposing responsibility. We see all the guest houses participating in the program. We have 48 resorts now that are actually segregating their plastics and sending it to us for recycling. The thing is, the infrastructure has to come. One project such as Pale has made this change in a chain of, where there's lack of infrastructure. So the blue economy KPIs need to be updated. We need to include it in whether it is a resort development, we need to consider it education programs, what you sell to the guests. Maybe a when you sell to the guests before they arrive to the Maldives, for example, unpack, leave the packaging in your country before you come, because your countries have better handle on this, handling this personal packaging, like the bottles where it's wrapped in plastic, or whether you bring so we actually educate a lot of this. And what I see is that we need to develop the infrastructure before we cannot handle another 50-60 resorts with the current infrastructure we have on waste or energy dependence on fossil fuels. We have reached, of course, an equilibrium probably long, and we are past that equilibrium of sustainability, but we can sustain. But we need to actually take a break and develop the infrastructure to do more in tourism. But we are actually increasing the tourism sector so there's an unbalance of development in the infrastructure sector too, because we now introduce homestay tourism, which means everybody can actually have access to the income. And Maldives is actually a very sustainable destination in many ways. The sector is private driven. The sector itself is becoming more compliant. So we need to develop on government policies and also projects that are outdated to maybe look at the template and review what is and prioritize actually these things for development of tourism sector.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sheena. I think it's great to hear that a lot has been done, good work has been done, and that you also see positive contributions of tourism to consumer awareness and awareness amongst residents as well as visitors from certain markets about their own responsibilities. We are opening up the floor for questions. There's a few questions already coming in. Anybody who's watching, please use the chat box to type in your questions. We'll see in the remaining 20 minutes or so what might be answered by the panel. I've got a follow-up question for Ms. Fernando from Sri Lanka. How important are the right policies and regulations in support of sustainable coastal and marine tourism? Do you think that they've been effective enough in Sri Lanka? Is there a need for things to change, to be tightened, to be made more clear? Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on that?
Absolutely. Policies are critical going forward, and policies have been made. I think where we can improve is where we look at each other's policies. There are several very critical line agencies who have impact and who has decision-making power and who have ability to execute making policies. So I think that we need to perhaps coordinate a little bit better in terms of that, as well as I think that in a way with COVID and all the impact it's had on the economy, this has a little bit taken a back seat, which is a worry, because making policy is one thing, implementing the policy is very important. So we are rallying our various key stakeholders in government at the moment, trying to get into consensus and have really short-term immediate action plans going forward.
Thank you very much. Jeff, I've got a question for you. Many hotel chains have sustainability policy framework. It's similar to what's been described earlier, and a growing number are getting started on sustainability. Can you give some examples of positive outcomes? What can one hotel actually accomplish by this rigorous application of policy and standards?
Sure, thanks. I think as a starting point, it's important to drastically limit any potential negative impacts. And I encourage any hotel to think of their natural environment, their marine resources as assets to the tourism business, because that's really what they are, right? I mean, people come to visit a resort in a marine coastal area. They want to see the beautiful ocean, the coral, the sea. If that's been destroyed, the business has lost an asset. So I think it's important to, as a starting point, to maintain those assets. Applied over time, there's great opportunity for resorts to have a positive impact on the marine environment. I'll draw on our, as a great example, within our group, Six Senses Lamu in the Maldives, where they've focused a lot of attention on this over the years. 5 years ago, they set themselves the goal to create a new marine protected area within their atoll, which did not exist before. So that was a 5-year process for them to work towards. And they were drawing on data. Today, they have 10 years of data behind them to back up arguments for that ecosystem and why it deserves protection. And then, of course, using that data to advocate for the protected area status. And I'm very proud to share that today they've created several new marine protected areas within their atoll. And that's directly as a result of tourism. I think that's, an honest statement to make. Without having that resort in the atoll and all the marine conservation work and the research to back it up, that's all funded through tourism, it would be very difficult to justify creating those marine protected areas. And that includes, for example, one unpopulated island that has a beach for nesting sea turtles, which, you know, without tourists and the scientists visiting that beach, of course, some locals are aware of the turtles, but without the data to present to the government, it's very hard to make that argument to protect that space. And so they've successfully done that. And this is, in my mind, this is where, you know, really tourism can add a lot of value applied over time. It does take time. It also takes a lot of community engagement. So again, in that location, they've been running an educational and community outreach campaign that touches on a dozen or so island communities within the atoll, where they visit those communities, they talk to them, they meet with their island councils, they go into the schools and run marine education programming in the schools in coordination with the island councils. So there's a lot of behind the scenes work required, but ultimately the outcome can be substantial gains for marine conservation.
Excellent, thanks, Jeff. Maybe sticking to the topic of private sector, moving back to Kiribati, Petero, how do you see the actions of the private sector tourism stakeholders in meeting sustainable objectives, specifically in Kiribati? Are they doing enough, you think?
Thank you, Walter. First of all, I'm really grateful that FAMA from the Maldives has acknowledged the role of the private sector, because they're quite, they're the drivers of the industry for us. For them, for us to even ask the question of whether they're doing enough, I think it's quite important for us as a government entity, is to ask the question, are we doing enough to involve them in the process and strategies? For example, our Sustainable Tourism Development Policy framework has 7 goals. And these include that tourism must protect the natural environment as a core goal of the framework. Tourism to preserve cultural and historical heritage. The tourism will promote community and social well-being, guarantee visitor satisfaction, and as well as contribute to the national economic prosperity of Kiribati. The tourism must leadership. If I look at our 7 goals here, private sector is written all over these 7 goals. So they do play a very important role. And I hope to live to see the day that we achieve what the Maldives has achieved in terms of having the tourism sector being driven by the private sector, by the operators, and just have government as an arm of monitoring and evaluation. The question of whether are they doing enough here in Kiribati? The definition of our private sector is quite different from that of the more developed destinations. Our private sector participants or private sector operators here in Kiribati, most of them, or I would say 90% of them, are private operators, and usually family-owned businesses or community-owned. And for them, when we so for me to even ask, are they doing enough? I'm more often asking myself, am I doing enough to be able to equip them, either whether it's financially or with the technical expertise, for them to carry out sustainable practices. From a tourism authority's perspective, we've started working on education and the Sustainable Tourism Policy and Strategy, which will then inform the private sector operators on what they need to do. And in order for them to be able to fulfill that obligation, we need to be supporting them as government to identify development partners that can assist them in terms of financing their shift towards the blue economy, towards greening, their style of entrepreneurship. And obviously, the onus is on the tourism authority to make sure that we're monitoring and policing them, but not only that, but to mentor them. Because as I mentioned earlier, we're a very young destination. And like I'd mentioned as well, is that we only have one try at this. So we're trying to ensure that we get the mix correct and not just putting the pressure on our private sector to deliver, but to also, hold their hand and walk that we desire to achieve for a young destination like Kiribati. And lastly, I think for us, the importance of partnership. As a small destination, we try to achieve as much as we can internally, but obviously we're always looking out to partner destinations and, taking the cue from what the Maldives has done, because their island structure is similar to ours. So, we look to learn from those successful destinations and take on those key lessons so that we as the tourism authority will then guide our private sector operators to be able to comply with the sustainable tourism policy requirements that we dish out to them to abide by. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it's very encouraging to hear that it's really a partnership. It's not us against them, private sector against government, but it's jointly that successes need to be achieved. Going back to the Maldives, Shaina, do you see a big difference between the commitments towards sustainable tourism from resort owners, local owners, international owners? We know the Maldives has this great mixture of early local pioneers, international brands, really all the aspects of global tourism are coming together. Is everybody committed to the same agenda, or are there differences that need to be overcome?
I believe there are differences to be overcome. There's a lot of big international brands here. They do a lot of sustainable initiatives. And there are other individuals, resorts and guest houses and small businesses, actually mostly the liveaboard sectors, that also the liveaboard sector is becoming a very niche. There's a lot of very luxury boats at the moment. So there's a disparity of the standards of operations and hotels and boats and guest houses. And I believe that there's a lot of the industry sector working in the sustainability, but a lot of it is very just shallow, and it's just very, it's just in the forefront, in the service areas. For example, guests come to a resort, they are told, oh, we don't use plastic water bottles, we bottle our own water and everything, but you go to the back of house, really the heart of the operation, you see everything plastic, or the shop for the staff has all plastic bottles. So it doesn't filter through what you are preaching to your clients and what you're marketing is not shown in your service or the back of house areas. So we are trying to actually look at what we do normally is we start with the back of house, not the front of house, because every resort, every operation in the Maldives, the front for the guest service areas is very compliant and very sustainable in many ways. But it is what happens in the back, and we need to have that true chain of service to be sustainable all the way through for us to reach that. And for the liveaboards, the biggest challenge is the space, of course, and of course they dump everything into the ocean. Also the crew needs to be educated. All the resorts actually, when they, for example, it's not what you carry when you're wearing that uniform. For example, I've seen a lot of staff in its brand hotels that are very sustainable. The minute the staff goes out of uniform, they are just throwing the bottle, or they are at the airport to pick up the guest and they drink the Coca-Cola and just dump it into the ocean. Or, so we need to put in every staff training, because every resort has a staff training and an induction program. And in this induction program needs to be more sustainable for you to be sustainable and to carry your work and your what you're preaching forward. So we try to do that, and we try to gently persuade the resort operations to really look at their, instead of us looking at it, just to look at their operations sustainably and train the staff and put it into staff training. I think human resource development is one of the strongest I think pillars that you will have for us to sustain this industry, because human resource usage in the industry is high, and I believe it's the human resource training that needs to be focused before we focused on any other environment section. Because once that is trained and once that focus is there, then everything will fall into place throughout.
Thank you. So still a lot of work to be done, especially in the hidden aspects of tourism. There's a question posted here in the chat box, and maybe Jeff, with your engineering background, I can put you on the spot. Do you think that negative carbon tourism is necessary a requirement in the tourism industry to combat climate change? Do you think that, I mean, it's a big ask, you know, can this industry actually make that contribution to be a net negative contributor to our carbon problem?
It's a big question, isn't it? Can it or should it? I think the whole world needs to be at least carbon neutral in a very short period of time. I think tourism should be carbon negative, absolutely. I mean, it's part of, I mean, ultimately tourism is very important for local economies and for the destinations, but it's always going to be looked at as more of a nice to have versus a necessity, like healthcare, for example, comparing industries. And don't get me wrong, I do feel that tourism is very important, especially economically for its destinations. However, to make that argument that it deserves any carbon budget, I think will be a challenge. So yes, I think it should be carbon negative. Can tourism become carbon negative is going to be $1 million question that we'll all be struggling to answer over the next decade or two. I think hotels can, for sure. It starts with energy efficiency, which we focus on a lot, and setting energy consumption reduction targets inside the operations. And there's still a lot that hotels can do on this, especially older buildings, older hotels. They're run typically very inefficiently because when they were built in the past, it wasn't a focus point that it is today. The way they're built, it can be much more efficient. Also, the energy sourcing for those hotels, we can do a lot more with renewables, and that's, as a brand, is something we're focused on very much. And we have a target for all of our new hotels to be 51% powered by renewables, for example, and that's probably not enough. But in today's world, that's a very high number. Can tourism be carbon negative? If you look at the travel impacts, that's going to be incredibly difficult, at least in today's world. And I think there's the elephant in the room on this question would be air travel. And I don't have an answer to that. And I am very hopeful that the world and we as an industry come up with a good answer to that very soon.
I think we all agree that we somehow want to build forward better coming out of this COVID pandemic. And I think we're all exposed to a lot broader sort of discussion around sustainability, at least from what I see in publications, and also demand coming from our member countries for support. Sustainability is very much becoming a part of the fabric, and is something we need to address a lot more rapidly. And I think you all reflected on that, the need for awareness, the need for the appropriate infrastructure, the need for partnerships to try and address that. I'm afraid we're running out of time. This is all we have time for, but the recordings will be posted, and I will still ask you offline to answer the remaining questions that are there, so we can make those available to participants as well. The Healthy Ocean Tech and Financing Forum will continue for another 2 days, so please do join us again tomorrow and the day after. I'd like to thank the distinguished panel. I hope sometime later this year we can all meet in person to continue these discussions and to contribute to a sustainable tourism that is effectively positive for our oceans and marine resources. With that, I'd like to thank you very much for everybody who's attended today's sessions, and I'm handing this back over to ADB colleagues for the official closure of today, and I believe that will be done by Anna Quinfeng from our head office. Thank you very much.
Hi, everybody. We have come to the end of day one of our inaugural ADB Healthy Oceans Tech and Finance Forum. My name is Anna Posa, and I am your MC. What a day! On behalf of the organizing team, I'd like to extend our gratitude to our partners, speakers, and participants who joined us today. It's been such an inspiring day listening to different discussions and ideas on how we can support healthy oceans. I'm here with Chingfeng Zhang. He is the Chief of the Rural Development and Food Security Thematic Group, and he is also the OIC of the Environment Thematic Group at ADB. Chingfeng has been instrumental in organizing this event. Hi, Chingfeng. How are you? What are your key takeaways for today?
Thank you so much, and I enjoy so much about the discussions today. I agree with you. Today is a great start of the Ocean Health Forum. It is the first Ocean Forum, as you know, the IDB hosted since we started the Ocean program in 2019. I can see so strong passions and also many inspirational initiatives coming from our speakers, partners, and also audiences. With this, I have the four take from the hearing from today's discussions. First, Ocean Health program is very critical for MDBs to achieve their climate ambitions. And the COP26, as you heard, President Massa signed a statement on nature with the heads of the other 8 MDBs. And in the signing ceremony, President Massa stated that together with the regional flyway initiative that we launched and the COP15 in Kunming, Ocean Health Program is an essential part of the ADB achieving its climate ambition by the 2030. Second, ocean health and the blue economy is closely related. As you heard from today, ADB's Vice President Bambang Susantoro emphasizes the region's high reliance on ocean economy. It is extremely important for us to take collective action to protect our coastal and marine ecosystem, and also as international financial institutions, ADB needs to catalyze innovative ocean finance. The third, this year is very, very important for us. We need to grab this as a great opportunity. As you heard from the Mr. Peter Thompson, the UN Secretary General's Special Ambassador for the Ocean today, he said in the opening session, we should claim the year 2022 as a year when we turn the tide on how we treat our oceans. We need to direct the finance to the technologies and the innovations that are very critical for us to deliver on our commitments. Finally, we need to scale up our investment in the blue food systems. You must have heard from our keynote speaker, Dr. Sukataro Sosert, and also Jim the Lip, highlight the critical interplay of food security, nutrition, climate, environment, and the development systems. And also the areas is play a very critical role for the seafood production. So again, from these two engaging panels, we really need to scale up our investment on sustainable agriculture and also seafood system, which will benefit both our human and also ocean health. Let me just pause here, Anna.
Thank you so much for sharing your key takeaways. And yes, it was very promising to hear about the different advancements in blue foods and marine value chains. When I was listening to the sessions, I was thinking, I'm never going to look at a plate of seafood the same way again. I just have so much more appreciation for it. And the spotlight session this afternoon, hosted by one of our partners, World Fish, it gave new insights on how we can build resilient aquatic food systems. And we heard similar messages actually across the board, and especially from the Coastal Resilience track, that oceans and human health are strongly intertwined.
You are right, actually, Anna. The ocean and human health is closely related. One thing probably also heard the important term nature-based solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Again, you also heard this type of the terminology many times from the COP26 in the Glasgow. Actually, the nature-based solutions not only just important for the climate change mitigation by expanding natural carbon sink, but also nature-based solution very important to enhance the biodiversity, build the resilience, provide the food and the water, and also help clean air and sustain the natural resources. I'm very, very happy to hear Dr. Michael Bate today discuss about the opportunities of integrating the nature-based solutions to build the coastal resilience for our communities in Asia and the Pacific. And I also heard how these solutions can be applied in many environments, including wetlands and also the rivers and the coastal areas as well. Today, we also heard many challenges and also the barriers, of course. One of them, of course, is growing plastic waste, which is very, very worrisome. Again, the Dr. Joanna Beck gave us some sobering statistics about the extent of the plastic pollution that is really harming our ocean health. We cannot believe that by the 2015, we already produces about a cumulative 8.3 billion metric tons of the plastic, weighing as much as 80 million blue whales already. Anna, over to you.
Yeah, 80 million blue whales is a lot of blue whales. I can't even imagine how many blue whales that is. But on the positive side, we also heard a lot of solutions, both emerging and existing, to tackle plastic pollution. I had the good fortune of moderating the session this morning called Circling Back, a back-to-back basics course, a back-to-basics course on circular economy, circular plastics economy. And it gave a very strong foundation of how we can tie economic and environmental outcomes together to overcome these issues in a sustainable and inclusive way. And we don't have to choose between the environment and the economy.
You are right, actually, and that's go to the heart of the ocean program. Circular economy, of course, is very critical for us to address the plastic waste. Again, we need to tie together economy, environment, community for us to achieve the ocean agenda. Again, finance for this type of integrated solution is very, very critical. Good thing is that we heard so many good news. One of the examples is from the Margaret Kuro, our global finance practice leader from WWF. She say the blue economy is gaining interest from the financial institutions, with trillions of the US dollars expected being targeted on ocean and coastal development over the next decade. So we also see so many good examples in the sessions today. Of course, one of them is our blue bonds, which we launched last year. You can see, take more information from the video. Our IDB's first blue bond insurance led last year. Over to you, Anna.
Yeah, it's really exciting that ADB was able to raise $300 million through its first blue bond issuance. Thank you so much, Xingfeng, for sharing your thoughts and reflections about today. I am ending this day with a lot more hope than I started this morning, and I hope you are too. The future is looking bright for healthy oceans. And that takes us to the end of day one. We hope that you will all join us tomorrow for another day of learning and discussions. Bye for now and see you tomorrow.
Thank you, Anna.